The spotlight was his throne, the roar of the crowd his symphony, yet beneath the shimmering costumes and the defiant strut, Freddie Mercury carried a profound, gnawing loneliness that fame could never truly fill. He commanded arenas with a single flick of his wrist, his voice a force of nature, yet in the quiet moments after the final bow, a vast silence often enveloped him, a chilling reminder of the chasm between the worshipped persona and the man beneath. He lived for the adoration, thrived on the energy of thousands, but yearned for an intimacy that perpetually eluded his grasp. "I've created a monster," he once quipped about his stage alter ego. "The monster is me." It was a monster that brought him unimaginable glory, but also walled him off from the very connection he desperately sought. Farrokh Bulsara entered the world on September 5, 1946, on the exotic island of Zanzibar, a vibrant tapestry of cultures and colors. His parents, Bomi and Jer Bulsara, were Parsis, followers of the ancient Zoroastrian faith, and their traditions instilled in young Farrokh a sense of heritage and discipline. His early years were shaped by the British boarding school system in India, where he was sent at the tender age of 8. St. Peter's School in Panchgani, high in the hills, was a strict environment, a world away from the bustling vibrancy of Zanzibar. It was there that the quiet, somewhat shy boy began to discover his artistic inclinations. He was drawn to the piano, his fingers finding a natural rhythm, and his voice, though still untrained, hinted at a nascent power. He loved to draw, to express himself through visual art, and even joined the school band, the Hectics, playing piano and singing with an emerging confidence. Music, then, was not merely entertainment. It was an escape, a pathway to self-expression in a world that often felt rigid and structured. It was a space where the young Farrokh could shed the quiet expectations and embrace a nascent theatricality. He was nicknamed Freddie by his schoolmates, a name that stuck and slowly began to eclipse his birth name, a subtle but significant step in the construction of the persona that would one day electrify the world. The return to Zanzibar in 1963 was brief, punctuated by the turmoil of the 1964 revolution, which forced the Bulsara family to flee to England, leaving behind their established lives. Landing in Feltham, Middlesex, was a stark contrast to the tropical warmth and colonial elegance of their past. It was a gray suburban landscape, and for Freddie, then 17, it meant a radical reorientation. He enrolled at the Ealing Art College, delving deeper into graphic design, but the gravitational pull of music was undeniable. He soaked up the sounds of the burgeoning London music scene, from Jimi Hendrix to The Who, absorbing influences, experimenting with styles, and always sketching in his mind the blueprint of a future, a stage where he would not just perform, but dominate. The shy boy from Zanzibar was slowly, meticulously, painting himself into the flamboyant showman he was destined to become. The journey to becoming Freddie Mercury, the undisputed king of rock theatrics, was paved with tireless ambition, countless disappointments, and the slow, arduous alchemy of raw talent transforming into polished brilliance. After art college, Farrokh Bulsara plunged headfirst into the vibrant, often cutthroat London music scene. He joined a string of bands, each one a stepping stone, a laboratory for his evolving stage presence and songwriting. There was Ibex, then Sour Milk Sea, names whispered now in the annals of forgotten rock history. These were the days of cramped, smoky clubs, of playing to handfuls of indifferent patrons, of lugging equipment and surviving on meager earnings. Rejection was a constant companion, failed auditions, record labels passing them over, the exasperating grind of trying to make a sound cut through the noise. Freddie, however, possessed an unshakable belief in his own destiny. He knew he was meant for something more than these dimly lit pubs. He wasn't just a singer. He was a star waiting for his stage. He lived and breathed music, his small, often shared apartments filled with scribbled lyrics and nascent melodies. He worked odd jobs, selling clothes in Kensington Market, his flamboyant style already hinting at the showman within. The pivotal moment arrived in 1970 when he joined forces with guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, who had been part of a band called Smile. This was the genesis. John Deacon joined a year later, solidifying the classic Queen lineup. It was Freddie who suggested the name change, a bold, defiant declaration of their royal ambitions. And it was Freddie who changed his own name, shedding Farouk Bulsara for the glittering, mythical Freddie Mercury. It wasn't just a name, it was a manifesto, a promise of the larger-than-life persona he was crafting. Early recording sessions were a crucible of creativity and tension. Their sound was unique, an audacious blend of hard rock, operatic flourishes, and theatrical grandeur that defied easy categorization. Record companies were baffled, hesitant. They were told they were too ambitious, too complicated, too expensive. The emotional toll was immense. Self-doubt would gnaw at them, but Freddie's unwavering conviction was the glue that held them together. Finally, in 1973, after years of struggle, Queen signed with EMI Records. Their debut album, Queen, was released to critical acclaim, but it was their live performances that truly began to captivate. Freddie, with his electrifying stage presence and a voice that could scale impossible heights, was a revelation. He didn't just sing, he performed, he acted, he commanded. The silence after a particularly challenging vocal acrobatics, followed by the eruption of applause, was the fuel that fed his soul. They had finally been heard, but the price of entry into this new world was a complete surrender to its demands, a sacrifice of the quiet life they had once known, replaced by the dizzying, often isolating, chaos of the spotlight. The spotlight years for Freddie Mercury and Queen were a supernova of creativity, extravagance, and unparalleled global domination. From the mid-1970s through the late 1980s, they weren't just a band. They were an institution, a spectacle, a force of nature. Bohemian Rhapsody, released in 1975, wasn't just a song. It was a groundbreaking mini-opera, a 6-minute masterpiece that defied conventional wisdom and became a monumental hit, cementing their reputation for audacious innovation. Then came the anthems, We Are the Champions, Somebody to Love, Don't Stop Me Now, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Another One Bites the Dust. Each song, a meticulously crafted gem, showcased their versatility and Freddie's incredible vocal range, from raw rock growl to soaring operatic falsetto. Sold-out stadiums became their natural habitat. Live performances were where Freddie truly came alive, transforming into the ultimate showman, a maestro of audience engagement. He owned the stage, strutting, preening, conducting the crowd with every gesture. The roar of tens of thousands singing along to his every word was the ultimate validation, a powerful drug that fueled his boundless energy. The emotional high of applause was palpable. It was a communion, a shared experience where he could shed his insecurities and become the godlike figure he had created. Tours spanned continents, leaving a trail of exhausted but exhilarated fans in their wake. They collected awards, broke sales records, and graced countless magazine covers, their flamboyant style and Freddie's magnetic charisma making them instantly recognizable icons. Backstage, the chaos was often exhilarating, a blur of costumes, quick changes, and the adrenaline rush before and after a show. There were the legendary parties, opulent and hedonistic, reflecting Freddie's desire for grand gestures and unrestrained enjoyment. He reveled in the attention, the luxury, the sheer scale of his success. Yet beneath the glittering veneer of celebrity, a quiet loneliness persisted. The very fame that brought him so much adulation also created an impenetrable barrier. Despite being surrounded by managers, bandmates, and legions of fans, true intimacy was elusive. His relationships, though passionate and intense, were often complicated by his celebrity and his guarded nature. He had a deep, enduring bond with Mary Austin, his former fiancée, whom he considered the love of his life, his common-law wife. She remained his closest confidant, his anchor in a world of shifting sands. But even with her, the the demands of his lifestyle and his own deeply private nature meant a certain emotional distance often remained. He loved to entertain, but he fiercely protected his private life, creating an almost unbreachable wall between Freddie Mercury, the showman, and Farrokh Bulsara, the man who craved simple domesticity and genuine connection. The very intensity of the applause, while validating, could also feel isolating, a reminder that the love was for the persona, not always for the vulnerable individual beneath. The quiet after the roar of the crowd, in a vast, empty hotel suite, often felt the most deafening, a profound silence that underscored the price of his extraordinary public glory. The dazzling edifice of Freddie Mercury's public persona began to show hairline fractures in the mid-1980s, the years that saw a slow, insidious internal collapse. While Queen continued to release successful albums and embark on monumental tours, a quiet, growing unease settled over Freddie's personal life. The relentless pace, the constant demands of touring and recording, combined with his increasingly hedonistic lifestyle, began to take a significant toll. The parties, once seen as an extension of his flamboyant spirit, became a retreat, a desperate attempt to fill the void of loneliness that gnawed at him. He sought fleeting connections in a world of constant admiration, often finding only superficial relationships that ultimately left him feeling more isolated. His health, though not yet publicly acknowledged as an issue, began to subtly decline. The fatigue, once easily dismissed as the rigors of touring, became more persistent. He was growing thinner, though his incredible stage presence often masked the physical changes. The heartbreak of failed relationships, the lingering pain of seeking true love in a world that offered only fleeting infatuation, weighed heavily on him. He craved stability, a home, a lasting connection, but the very nature of his fame made such a simple desire almost impossible to achieve. In interviews from this period, a poignant weariness sometimes crept into his voice, a subtle hint of the man behind the mask. "I just want to be loved," he once famously said, a sentiment that underscored the profound loneliness he felt despite the adoration of millions. The internal collapse wasn't a sudden, dramatic implosion, but a gradual erosion of his spirit, a slow draining of his life force as the hidden illness began its relentless work. The whispers of AIDS, then a terrifying, largely misunderstood epidemic, began to circulate in the tabloids. Freddie, fiercely private by nature, vehemently denied the rumors, even as his physical appearance continued to change. This public denial, while understandable given the widespread prejudice and fear surrounding the disease, forced him to live a life of increasing secrecy and isolation. He retreated further into his private world, surrounded by a trusted circle of friends and loved ones, but unable to share his truth with the vast audience who adored him. The silence of his suffering was deafening, a poignant contrast to the thunderous applause he could still command on stage. He continued to work, pouring his emotional turmoil into his music, the very act of creation becoming a form of desperate therapy. But the energy that had once seemed boundless was slowly, irrevocably ebbing away. The turning point, a moment that simultaneously marked a glorious triumph and a poignant, unspoken farewell, arrived on July 13, 1985, at Wembley Stadium. Live Aid. It was a global concert, a monumental endeavor to raise funds for famine relief in Ethiopia, and Queen, initially hesitant to perform, delivered a legendary, unforgettable set. From the moment Freddie Mercury strode onto that massive stage, clad in white trousers and a sleeveless white vest, he commanded the entire stadium, and through television, the entire world. His performance that day was a masterclass in showmanship, a distillation of everything that made him one of the greatest frontmen in history. He led the crowd in call and response chants, his voice soaring, powerful, and utterly captivating. He stalked the stage with an almost predatory grace, turning 72,000 people into his personal choir. Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, We Will Rock You, and We Are the Champions. Each song delivered with an intensity and passion that transcended mere performance. It was a collective experience, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. But beneath the surface, for those who knew him, there was a quiet understanding that this might be his last truly grand public statement. Though still fiercely private about his health, the physical toll of his illness was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Live Aid was a defiant, glorious roar in the face of what was to come. It reshaped not only Queen's legacy, propelling them back into the global consciousness with renewed vigor, but also Freddie's own sense of self. He had proven, unequivocally, that he was still capable of commanding the world stage, that his power and charisma were undiminished. This monumental performance, however, also marked the beginning of his quiet retreat from the relentless glare of the public eye. The energy expended that day, the sheer force of will required to deliver such a performance, was immense. It was the peak of his public life, a crescendo before the slow, inevitable diminuendo. The ovation that day was not just for the songs, but for the man, the performer, who gave everything he had one last time to a world that adored him. After the incandescent blaze of Live Aid, Freddie Mercury embarked on what would become his quiet yet intensely creative final chapter. He didn't fade away. He retreated, meticulously curating his remaining time to be filled with what mattered most: music and a trusted circle of loved ones. The world, still reeling from the majesty of his Live Aid performance, eagerly awaited his next move. Queen released A Kind of Magic in 1986, followed by a triumphant European tour culminating in 2 iconic Wembley Stadium shows. These concerts, though still spectacular, were his last major tours. The energy was still there, the voice still phenomenal, but the relentless pace of touring was becoming unsustainable. He made a conscious, private decision to step away from the touring life, to dedicate his time to creating music, and to living out his days on his own terms. His retreat from public view intensified as his health declined. The tabloids, ever intrusive, continued to speculate, but Freddie remained steadfastly private, shielding his family and friends from the relentless media storm. He moved into Garden Lodge, his beautiful Kensington home, turning it into a sanctuary where he could find solace, surrounded by art, his beloved cats, and the people he cherished. This was his true life after fame, not a forced retirement, but a deliberate choice to prioritize his peace and his passion. He recorded prolifically, pouring his emotions and experiences into new Queen albums like The Miracle and Innuendo. His voice, though physically strained at times, gained an even deeper emotional resonance, a poignant vulnerability that elevated songs like The Show Must Go On into powerful, almost prophetic anthems. He continued to work right up until his final days, recording vocals for tracks that would later appear on the posthumous album Made in Heaven. This period was a profound demonstration of his humanity, his unwavering dedication to his art, even as his body betrayed him. He found a quiet strength in the face of immense suffering, coping with the silence after the spotlight, not by wallowing, but by creating, by transforming his pain into timeless beauty. He didn't seek healing in the conventional sense, but rather a profound acceptance, a way to live fully and creatively, even as life was slipping away. Freddie Mercury's voice still echoes today, a resonant, defiant roar across the decades. What he gave the world was not just music, but an unshakable spirit of liberation, a flamboyant refusal to be confined by convention. He gave us anthems of triumph, ballads of heartbreak, and a stage presence that redefined what it meant to be a rock star. He taught us to embrace our true selves, to live life without apology, and to find the extraordinary in the mundane. He transformed every performance into a grand opera, every song into a universal declaration. He showed us that vulnerability could coexist with immense power, and that even in loneliness, art could provide solace. What the world took from him, perhaps, was the very privacy he craved, the simple quietude of a life unburdened by relentless public expectation. It took a toll on his body, forcing him into a tragic isolation even amidst global adoration. Yet in his final act, he gave us one last profound gift: the courage to face mortality with dignity and grace, and a quiet, powerful statement about his battle with AIDS that broke through the silence and stigma of the era. His life, a dazzling, heartbreaking tapestry woven with sound and silence, stands as a testament to the transformative power of art and the enduring spirit of a man who dared to be truly, gloriously himself. And in the hush that follows his final soaring note, we are left with the indelible image of an empty stage, bathed in the lingering glow of an imaginary spotlight, forever awaiting his return.